Okay, so we talked about the southern edge of this outwash plain, the stream valley. Now let's talk about the plain as a whole. What kind of area would that be? What kind of vegetation would you find? So it's actually quite a large area. In the other clips, you've learned more about the hydrology and the soils and its origin. Now let's take a look at the landscape and what you see. So if you continue on those same roads, first you went through the forest on the ridge, then you crossed the brook valley, and then you come into this rather open landscape. As you can see, well, this picture was, as you can see, it was taken in a very dry spell, because there's hardly any vegetation on the soil. Everything is yellow, but still there are leaves on the trees, so it must be a dry spell in summer. It's a very open landscape, but it is a man-made landscape still. However, also naturally, this would probably be quite an open landscape, because the sand is coarse, which means that there's very little water available. It's highly prone to droughts in summer, and it contains very little minerals. There are no or fewer loam bands and finer material in the sands that contain minerals like calcium, a bit of phosphate perhaps. So vegetation growth is difficult, and that means also that successions of vegetation development is very slow. Yes, nitrogen will come into the system and it will accumulate in the soil, but it is the lack of the other nutrients, things like minerals like calcium, plus the susceptibility to drought, that basically slow down vegetation development and allows these heathlands to persist for a very, very long time. So these areas were probably heathland for a long time, but nowadays there is some clear human influence. They were eventually also used for agriculture after irrigation and artificial fertilizers increased the possibilities. So nowadays, for example, you would find a golf course also. You can imagine the amount of fertilizer and water needed to maintain it, but also there are grasslands and for farmers in the area. However, it remains obviously a suboptimal area, which means that it's also one of the first areas that will be abandoned again by agriculture when it's no longer profitable, and then there's room for nature restoration sometimes, and you get very interesting things. For example, this is a picture taken on one of these formerly fertilized grasslands. The nutrients have not been removed. It's just that the regime is being changed, so there's a low density of grazers are introduced instead of a very frequent mowing, and then you get nice grassland developing, but it is a grassland that you would normally, without all the fertilizer, not find in this area. If you look closely here, you see that there are all kinds of green islands, dark green islands here, which you can even see better in an aerial picture here, right? This is an earlier picture, but you can see all these tiny islands, and they arise because of the grazing in combination with the nutrients that are in the soil, because these are thickets of bramble. Bramble, of course, as you probably know, they are protected by thorns against grazing, so they can, thanks to the nutrients that are in the soil, they can establish in this vegetation, and then they have a benefit because they're not grazed as the surrounding vegetation is, so they can grow quite rapidly and really form these islands of dark green and usually also higher vegetation in the grassland. So it's really a nice example of how grazing can shape the system. And eventually these islands may even provide opportunities for tree seedlings to establish. Most grazers like tree seedlings, so whenever they pop up in the grassland, they are immediately eaten. But of course, in these bramble thickets, they may have an opportunities to survive and grow into an adult tree, and then you have what you get is a nice grassland with patches of a few trees or even isolated trees. This formation of these islands with shrubs of thorny shrubs you will also see in close to the river, and there it's shrubs of hawthorn that basically create the same pattern. But for this region, it is rather unusual, but because naturally without the fertilization in the soil, it would be too poor to allow these plants to establish, and probably also to allow high densities of large herbivores. However, we're also restoring the former heathland, but then after the former nutrient-rich agricultural soil has been removed. So this is also a common site that you can find in the area, actually quite close to the road we started on. And you can see all these green parts are reappearing, re-establishing patches of heather. So this area is slightly is gradually turning into a new heathland that we want to conserve in the region.